What's up, everyone? Today is the 24th of September, 2024, and welcome back to this, the 86th edition of the Superstream. My name is Derek, author and webmaster of Gematrinator.com. And as we do every week, we will be looking at this past week in the world of synchronicity and numerology between the world of news, politics, and sports. And shout out to all my friends who have jumped in the chat early today. I'm going to talk about a couple of things, starting with the death of former Dolphins Super Bowl winner Mercury Morris, a running back who shared the backfield with Larry Zonka, passing away at the age of 77. And we'll talk about how the name Morris rhymes with the name Norris, and it was Lando Norris who picked up the win at the Singapore Grand Prix in Formula One just hours after we learned about Mercury Morris's death. In that Singapore Grand Prix, we also got a couple of other magnificent numeric riddles, particularly one involving RB driver Daniel Ricciardo, who may have participated in his final Grand Prix of his career. What we'll look at is how all of these news stories contain a massive pie riddle that all syncs back to September 11th. And as a little bit of an aside, we'll be exploring the film Pi from 1998, a psychological thriller, and the first film by director Darren Aronofsky, and how the numerology of that film ties into everything that goes on. And Chris in the chat, sorry to hear about your pet, man. Sad day. As a cat owner, I can empathize. And as we go, we'll see how this all syncs up with Don Shula and John Madden. Now, before we get into the numbers for today's video, I want you to all check out the links in the description below, where you'll find a video where I jumped on board with Cody over at his channel, Decoding with Cody, over the weekend on Saturday. And early on in that video, I explained how there's been a significant riddle for the city of Miami. And my buddy Bobby was also on this stream, and he reminded us that this was a big weekend for Mercury. And of course, when it comes to sports, perhaps the sport that's most closely related to Mercury is Formula One, or at least racing, since Mercury is the god of transportation. However, I don't even know if I would have believed how true this would have rang, because that very day, the same day we did that super stream, a former Miami running back named Mercury died. And this is the type of thing that happens all the time on this channel. The best example recently, perhaps being James Earl Jones, where we talk about celebrities that are trending and things that are going on in the news, and then sure enough, something happens the very next day by the exact code that we're talking about. And who would have thunk it would have been this obvious? Mercury Morris, former Dolphins running back, passing away just hours before the Grand Prix in Singapore. And of course, the name Morris rhyming with the name Norris, who gets the win. In my last super stream, we talked a lot about the world of racing, and on the thumbnail for that video, you'll see IndyCar driver Colton Herta holding the guitar as he was the winner of the Nashville Grand Prix at the oval track, getting his first ever oval win. And in that video, I spent a lot of time talking about the big pie riddle that was at play over there in Nashville, Tennessee, where Colton Herta now lives. Well, on September 22nd, the same day as the race in Singapore, the Green Bay Packers visited Nashville, Tennessee. And look at the final score of this game. 30-14. This with the same digits as pi. 3.14, the first three digits of the irrational number. Found right here in the score of the game in Nashville, Tennessee. Now, when it comes to pi and the world of media, back in 1998, when I was just 13 years old, the movie Pi was released. And once again, the first major film of director Darren Aronofsky, who has gone on to have a pretty successful career, made some very interesting films during his time. Notice how if you measure from the release date of the film Pi back in July of 1998, this month, September, marks 314 months since the release of the film Pi. And this is the number that's going to carry us through much of this decode. Because everything that happened this weekend certainly had Pi in mind. So if you happen to be new to the channel, we focus on numerology through the language of Gematria, the ancient number lettering system that provides a numeric value to every name, word, and phrase. The ordinal method branches off into the base 4 ciphers, where the alphabetic order is reversed or reduced. And these give way to the larger denary ciphers. Standard Gematria using the current English alphabet. Latin Gematria, built off the ancient 23-letter classical Latin alphabet. So Mercury Morris of the Miami Dolphins dies, and Morris was a member of the Miami Dolphins team that won Super Bowl VII. And Super Bowl VII is a very historic one in the NFL because it's the only time in the league's history that a team completed a perfect season. And this is the theme of today's video because pi is essentially mathematical perfection, a perfect circle, one that's considered impossible to be drawn by hand. In the alphabetic order, the word perfect sums to 73, and it was the year 73 that this perfect season was finished. In fact, the Dolphins would also win the Super Bowl for the 73 season the following year. The head coach of the Miami Dolphins, his full name is Donald Francis Shula, which also shares this 73. And all the events of this weekend were essentially a tribute to the numerology of Don Shula. 73 is also the gematria of the word Mason in reverse. And the team that's perhaps most closely associated with Masonry, the Green Bay Packers, who have the G on their helmet. Notice how Packers sums to 73. And they were in the city of Nashville, Tennessee, which equals 73. Remember, the 73rd day of the year is March 14th, what we call Pi Day, the date written 3/14. And once again, the Packers securing a 30-14 win in the city of Nashville for this game. Now, in the year 1973, we also had the opening of the World Trade Center, which was destroyed on September 11th. And this is important to what we'll be discussing because September 11th, 2001, the date the towers were destroyed, was the same exact day that the book Life of Pi was published. And indeed, that will also be a topic as we go. So 1973, the year of the perfect season, the year that the World Trade Center first opened up. Well, this number 1973 is something that I've been talking about for several videos. When you write out the number 973, you get gematria of 1973. And after the World Trade Center was opened in the year 1973, they were destroyed during Brown lunation number 973. Every new moon since January of 23 has been numbered. And this brown lunation number, this is what this is called. The BLN, the brown lunation number. Well, in Formula One, the CEO of McLaren, who was the winning team for this Singapore Grand Prix, the team that Lando Norris drives for, the team's CEO is named Zach Brown. So we have a tribute to the brown lunation number right there. Notice how Zach Brown was born 9,073 days after Mercury Morris, the running back who died just a day before the race. Mercury Morris was 19,973 days old for the 9/11 attacks back in 2001. Now, a reason Miami has been trending so hard lately is because Miami is the city where Lando Norris won his first ever F1 Grand Prix just earlier this year. And on that date, his team's president, Zach Brown, was 19,173 days old. Now, this is a number I've been talking about, again, for several weeks now. Back in May of this year, we had a turbulence event on a Singapore Airlines flight where one person died and dozens were injured. And this is an event that I connected to the Singapore Grand Prix when it happened because it was on a Singapore Airlines flight. And there was a very significant 9/11 riddle that was going on there. And check this out. That happened aboard a 777 aircraft. And 777 is the Gematria of Republic of Singapore. 777. And on the date of that turbulence event, Max Verstappen, who got second in the race, was 9,730 days old. Airplanes, of course, all synced up with 9/11. But this is what really stands out about it. When you measure from the date of the first ever flight for a 777 airliner all the way back in 1994, the same year that Ayrton Senna died, this year's Singapore Grand Prix was 11,060 days later. And this, of course, has the upside-down 9/11 in it. Later this year, Ayrton Senna will be depicted on a miniseries on Netflix. And the name of that actor, Gabriel Leone, his full name equals 1106. And Gabriel Leone was 9 months and 11 days old when Ayrton Senna died. So there's more to do with that, as we will see. Last week, Lando Norris was 9,073 days old. However, that race was won by his teammate in the number 81 car. And that race was exactly 973 weeks after Kobe Bryant scored 81 points all the way back in 2006. That was the same week that Miami's quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, got injured by Damar Hamlin. And when Damar Hamlin had his famous on-field collapse, Tua was 9,073 days old. So it's pretty amazing how many times this number has popped up recently. And as we see, it's the number that connects Mercury Morris to the Mercury riddle that was the September 11th attacks. When you look at ancient Roman mythology, the god of Mercury was connected to financial gain, messages and communication, travelers and boundaries, and even luck and trickery. These are all elements that were very significant to the 9/11 attacks. A building which housed many financial companies with radio towers that allowed you to communicate with others. Destroyed by airplanes that were traveling across borders. Stolen by thieves. This was completely a Mercury riddle. And when you look at the date September 11th of 2001, we find that it had numerology of 41. Which is the reverse reduction value of Mercury. In fact, in the reverse alphabetic order, Mercury equals 86. And here I am talking about the death of a man named Mercury in Superstream number 86. So once again, the number gods grinning down on my YouTube channel for whatever reason. So this is very insignificant. 1973, 973. We see how strongly this all comes together. But what I also want to talk about is another riddle from yesterday's race. Towards the end of the race, RB driver Daniel Ricciardo picked up the fastest lap, stealing the fastest lap from winner Lando Norris. And what this did, essentially, is help Max Verstappen's title hopes, because Verstappen is leading Norris in the championship. And Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen used to be teammates for the main Red Bull team, but since then, Ricciardo has been demoted more or less to the junior team. Now, his team denies that they were helping Max Verstappen. They just said they wanted to give Ricciardo a nice farewell because this was probably Daniel Ricciardo's last ever Grand Prix in Formula One. So let's look at the numerology of Ricciardo, because he himself is a massive pie riddle to Darren Shula, the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. So let's talk a little bit about this. So Daniel Ricciardo was born on July 1st of 1989, the date written 7-1 or 1-7. His last name has the 1070. Pi director Darren Aronofsky was exactly 1,700 weeks old on 9/11. His film Pi was released on July 10th, which has the same digits as Ricciardo's birthday. Exactly 13 years after the release of Pi, Daniel Ricciardo made his F1 debut at the British Grand Prix on the exact same date, July 10th. So it's been 314 months since the release of Pi, as I explained earlier. The driver that Ricciardo helped, Max Verstappen, was born 3,014 days after Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel Ricciardo was born exactly 3,104 weeks after Dolphins coach Darren Shula. And when Darren Shula passed away in 2020, Daniel Ricciardo was 30 years, 10 months, and 4 days old for another 314. When the movie Pi was released in 1998, notice how the date had numerology of 134, the same 3 digits. Pi film sums to 134. On Pi Day next year, Daniel Ricciardo will be 13,040 days old. And why is Pi Day so significant next year? Well, on March 14th, or 3/14, we will have our first total lunar eclipse in over 2.5 years. And no doubt about it, everything that's going on this past weekend is connected to this special Pi Day eclipse. So scrolling down a little bit here. Sorry, I got 5 posts, and there's a ton to cover. So forgive me while I find my base here. Now, look at how Darren Shula is synced up with the film Pi. With the S exception, the name Shula equals 25. And in the alphabetic order, the word Pi equals 25. When the movie Pi came out, Darren Shula was 25,025 days old. A few years later, when Life of Pi was published on September 11th, that was 250 days after Darren Shula's birthday. Now, in Gematria, the word pi shares Gematria with circles, They both share the numbers 95 and 69. Well, on the Pi Day eclipse next year, Shula would have been 95 years and 69 days old. That eclipse is also 1,776 days after Shula died. And 1776 is not only the birth year of the United States, but when you add together the 6 different permutations of the 3 digits of pi, you get a sum of 1776. Now, look at how the date September 22nd connected to pi. First of all, notice how the word pi has gematria of 174. This is the gematria of number of the beast. Also, head coaches Don Shula and John Madden both have 174 gematria. We'll talk about Madden more in a second. On the date this film came out, director Darren Aronofsky was 10,740 days old. And the release date, July 10th, was the date that leaves 174 days in the year. If you measure from the date Mercury Morris died to the Pi Day eclipse next year, we find it was 174 days earlier. If you include the end date, the Singapore Grand Prix was held 174 days before that same eclipse. So both days this past weekend had the 174 connection, just like the film Pi did to the director and the special date on the calendar. So with all this 314, we talked about this, the number that connects Daniel Ricciardo to Don Shula. But of course, there's a lot more. The winner of the Singapore Grand Prix was Lando Norris. And notice how the names Lando and Lando Norris both sum to 314. The word circles equals 69 and 314. And Lando Norris was born 69 years and 314 days after head coach Don Shula. When Don Shula died, it was a span of 314 days before the date 314, or Pi Day. McLaren CEO Zak Brown was 19,314 days old for the Singapore Grand Prix, a race which was also held 314 days after Lando Norris's birthday. This race on September 22nd was also a span of 3 months and 14 days before Don Shula's January 4th birthday. And if you don't include the end date, it was also 3 months and 14 days before Mercury Morris's January 5th birthday. Again, Mercury Morris and Don Shula, their birthdays are separated by just 1 day on the calendar. So what are the odds that all of these 314s line up so perfectly with these guys? Now, what really made this interesting is that September 22nd is also 314 days before August 2nd. And August 2nd is the date of the 2027 total solar eclipse. And again, the word eclipse summing to 314. In Satanic Gematria, a cipher constructed around the number 666. So why is the year 2027 for that eclipse with the 314 connection so important? Well, on a calculator, if you take 22 divided by 7, you get the first 3 digits of pi, 314. And then 22 divided by 7, when you write it out in Gematria, gives you another 314. Alt 227 on a Windows keyboard will give you this pi symbol. So again, this race, 314 days before the date of the 2027 eclipse. Back to this Pi Day lunar eclipse, however. Now, when I talked about Miami last week, a big part of that riddle had to do with Trump's golf course where the alleged assassination attempt occurred. And Trump's golf course is in the Miami, Florida area. Well, the coach of the Dolphins, Don Shula, his first name is Donald, just like the former president. But also notice how his middle name is Francis. Francis is also the name of the current Bishop of Rome, the leader of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis. Now, when you look at Pope Francis's age for the Pi Day eclipse next year, notice how he will be 88 years and 88 days old. This is a very strong alignment because you also get the 322 and 223 skull and bones connection, which we'll look at in a little while. But this double 88 is really important because earlier this year, for Superstream 78, I talked about how John Madden would have been 88 years and 88 days old for the races that weekend back in July. And the number 88 is important to John Madden. The name John Madden equals 88. While in Latin Gematria, his full name, John Earl Madden, equals 888. And not only does 88 have 6 circles in it, but when you write out 3.14, the first 3 digits of pi, it sums to 888. So this alignment for the Pope for this Pi Day eclipse is super significant. So a little bit more on Lando Norris, the winner of the Grand Prix this weekend. So notice how the word circle has gematria of 50 in the alphabetic order. And in 2 of our most significant ciphers, Latin and Satanic gematria, the letter O, which is a circle, has a value of 50. Well, this weekend's race was held in the city-state of Singapore, and Singapore has gematria of 50. Well, the 50th prime number is 229. And this was the date of the race in Singapore, the 22nd of September, or 22/9. Notice how the name Francis sums to 229 in Latin gematria. The Pope's real name, Jorge Mario Bergoglio, sums to 1229 in Fibonacci. And this is the date of the final race of Daniel Ricciardo. Now, when Daniel Ricciardo made his F1 debut on the anniversary of the movie Pi, Ricciardo was 22 years and 9 days old. And on the date of his last race, 22/9, it's been exactly 229 weeks after the death of Don Shula. This race is also 229 mercurial years after the moon landing. But perhaps more important is that the number 8 has gematria of 229. And Daniel Ricciardo is an 8-time Grand Prix winner in Formula One. And notice how not only does Daniel Ricciardo equal 80 in reduction, but his last name Ricciardo also equals 80 using the standard alphabetic order. The director of Pi, Darren Aronofsky, has birth numerology of 83. And this is important because the circle sums to 83 in the alphabetic order. And earlier I pointed out how Daniel Ricciardo was born a span of 3,014 days before Max Verstappen, giving us that pi riddle, right? 314. But also notice how this same measurement is also 8 years and 3 months. The circle, 83. Well, Ricciardo's potential final race in Singapore was 83 days after his birthday. In fact, Don Shula died 8 years and 300 days after Ricciardo's first race in Formula One. And his name, Don Francis Shula, is 83. And when he died, Pope Francis was 83 years old. 83, like the big football number. Football sums to 83 in the alphabetic order. So speaking of the circle and how it pertains to Mercury Morris, in standard reduction gematria, the circle equals 47. This is another important number to Freemasonry, whose compass, which is used to draw the circle, is set to 47 degrees. Well, 47 is the 15th prime number. And look at the birthday of Mercury Morris. 1/5 of 47. And remember, the circle, the letter O, is the 15th letter of the alphabet. 15, 47. Hopefully you see how well this all comes together. Mercury died 260 days after his birthday. And that's the satanic gematria of the word circle. He played his entire career for the Miami Dolphins. And not only was he 223 months old when the Dolphins were founded, but he was also 223 days after his birthday. The word circle equals 223 with capital letters. So more about this number 15. The letter O. The 15th letter, like Mercury Morris, born 1/5. The word 15th also has gematria of 150. And in Sumerian gematria, which is the alphabetic order times 6, the word pi equals 150. Well, the team who won this game with the pi score this past Sunday were the Green Bay Packers. And Green Bay Packers equals 150. And wouldn't you know, this was the 15th meeting between the Packers and Titans all time, including games between the Packers and Oilers. This weekend's race in Singapore was the 15th Singapore Grand Prix to ever be held. So the race in Singapore was won by Lando Norris. And notice how Green Bay, Singapore, Lando Norris, and Morris all share 139 gematria with Freemasonry. If you measure from Lando Norris's first ever win, which was in the city of Miami, to the death of the Miami star named Mercury, it was 139 days later. But notice this Freemasonry connection. This is so important here. Check this out. So Freemasonry equals 139 in ordinal, but notice the square number value. This cipher is the alphabetic order, but with squared numbers applied. Freemasonry sums to 2311 in this cipher. Sunday's race was 20,311 days after Darren Aronofsky was born. And it was also 23 years, 11 days after the 9/11 attacks. Now, the syncs between Darren Aronofsky and September 11th can never be understated. It's extreme numerology that we're about to look at it here. So check this out. So once again, the big riddle this weekend for the Singapore race was that Daniel Ricciardo got the fastest lap. And shout out to Casey Jones in the chat. I am going to talk about Mercury in a second. Don't worry about it. There's so much to cover left. But I need to get this out of the way first. So fastest lap equals 119. Ooh. 1 second, excuse me. All right. Sorry, I had a little frog in my throat there. About 40 minutes in, this is what happens. Sorry, I'm a little bit under the weather today. I was going to say something earlier, but I need to trudge through this decode, so let me battle this out. Now, Darren and the names Aronofsky. Darren and Aronofsky both equal 119 in Gematria. Furthermore, the last name Aronofsky also equals 1119 in trigonal. Well, this weekend's race was the 1119th Grand Prix in the history of Formula One. Earlier this year, we had the 1109th Grand Prix. And notice how those races were separated by 119 days. On the date of the September 11th attacks, or 9/11, Darren Aronofsky was exactly 11,900 days old. The attacks were also 1,160 days after the release of his film Pi. When the movie Pi came out, Max Verstappen was 9 months and 11 days old. In 2008, Aronofsky released one of his biggest films called The Wrestler. And I've been talking for weeks about how there's a significant wrestling riddle going on with this all as well. Well, notice how The Wrestler was released 10 years, 160 days after the movie Pi. The main character of The Wrestler is played by Philip Andre Rourke, which is Mickey Rourke's full name. And notice how his name equals 9/11. In the film, he plays a wrestler named Randy Robinson, whose name equals 1116. F1 pilot Daniel Ricciardo, born on a date with 116 numerology. And he made his F1 debut exactly 156 months after Pi came out. And 156, well, 9/11 is the 156th prime number. And this is the same weekend as the death of Mercury Morris. Mercury Morris equals 156. Donald Francis Shula shares 156 gematria with the word perfect in Fibonacci. The 911th prime number is 7109. And Daniel Ricciardo was 7,109 days old when The Wrestler came out. So Shula has this middle name Francis, once again connecting to the Pope. Well, notice how Pope Francis was elected during Brown Lunation 11/16/1116. That was 11 years and 6 months after the 9/11 attacks. Francis was 1,019 sidereal months old. Both Francis and Vatican sum to 119 in the reverse alphabetic order. And in Formula One, there's a driver named Franco, not Francis, but Franco. And this guy was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, the same exact city that Pope Francis was born in. Buenos Aires, Argentina. Well, on the date of the Singapore race, notice how Colapinto was 119 days after his birthday. When Francis became the Pope, Darren Aronofsky was 16,101 days old. 16 and 11 are the reduction values of the word pie, just like the movie he directed from 1998. Donald Francis Shula was 2,540 days old when Pope Francis was born, and 9/11, the 254th day on the calendar. So earlier I mentioned that Pope Francis was going to be 88 years and 88 days old for the Pi Day eclipse. A number synced to John Madden. And I talked about, once again, if you measure from John Madden's birthday to the date that he was 88 years and 88 days old, it was Sunday, July 7th. And that weekend we had the British Grand Prix, which was won by Lewis Hamilton. And if you want to see more on this, check this super stream out. This is one of my better super streams. And it proves that all these racing motorsports around the world are all synced together by the numbers. Now, when it comes to the planet Mercury, John Madden is the ultimate Mercury riddle. Madden died in the year 2021 on December 28th, or 1228. Mercury equals 1228 in standard. In the ordinal methods, Mercury equals 103 and 86. And John Madden died 103 days before his 86th birthday. His birthday on April 10th, or 410. And Mercury equals 41. Of course, Mercury, the god of transportation. And when John Madden was traveling between stadiums, he refused to fly on airplanes. He took a bus everywhere he went. And he used to be the coach of the Raiders, who now play in Las Vegas. Well, on the same exact day John Madden died, we also had the death of Senator Harry Reid. And 2 weeks before they died, the airport in Las Vegas was renamed to Harry Reid Airport. This all a nod to the extreme Mercury riddle that's present here. So check this out. When I last talked about Madden and F1, it was after the races on July 7th, or 7-7. And this is an important number to Madden, who wore number 77 during his playing career in the NFL. Well, now this weekend, we get the death of Eugene Morris, better known as Mercury Morris, at the age of 77. And the name Eugene Morris equals 77. In fact, Eugene Morris is a supermatch with 77 in Gematria. Well, this week's race was 77 days after the date 7-7. McLaren's CEO born exactly 77 lunations after the Miami Dolphins were founded. And this is a number that's connected to September 11th, which sums to 77, just like World Trade Center. John Madden got one Super Bowl victory during his entire career, and it was in Super Bowl 11, which was held on the 9th day of the year. 9 and 11. Well, that game was played 9,011 days before the 9/11 attacks. When you write out the date 9/11/01 and flip it upside down, you get the digits 1116. This week's winner, Lando Norris, equals 1116. And not only did Lando win the 1116th Grand Prix, but now he's also won the 1119th. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but his name ends with an O, the circle. And then he's got another one in his last name. And this all ties into the whole thing with Daniel Ricciardo, whose name also ends with the circle. So as I pointed out, 3.14 and John Earl Madden both equal 888. Sunday was 18,880 days after the Dolphins finished their perfect season, on a date with 88 numerology. Both days this weekend, Saturday and Sunday, were 999 days after the death of John Madden. Mathematics of the circle and mathematical perfection, both 666. And with all this talk about Mercury, it made me wonder if Freddie Mercury was connected to anything here. And of course it was, right? Freddie Mercury. If you measure from his birthday to the birthday of Mercury Morris, notice how they were born a span of 123 days apart. And in Gematria, the name Freddie sums to 123 in standard Gematria. Well, Freddie Mercury died in 1991. And if you measure from his death to the death of Mercury Morris, notice how they died 11,991 days apart. So you have the year that Freddie Mercury died, 1991, but then you also get the 119. Well, notice how in Gematria the name Freddie Mercury equals 911. And on the date of the 9/11 attacks, Freddie would have been 660 months and 6 days old. Freddie was born in Zanzibar. And notice how Zanzibar gives us the 119. The word perfection also equals 666. Well, Freddie Mercury died 3,580 days before the 9/11 attacks. Perfection equals 358, while John Earl Madden equals 358 as well. So with all this pi talk, 314, consider how on a clock, 3 hours and 14 minutes is also 194 minutes. So there's this epic connection between 314 and 194. And this is exhibited in the Gematria of the word Catholic. Notice how Catholic equals both 314 and 194. The Catholic Church, led by the Pope. John Madden would have been exactly 1,094 lunar phases old for the events this past weekend. McLaren got their 188th win. 188 equals 1,094. John Madden was born in Austin, Minnesota, which equals 194. September 11th, 2001, 119, all summing to 194. Now, if you flip the 9 upside down, you, of course, get a 6. And this number connects him to Don Shula, if I can find it. Well, anyway, the name Don Francis Shula sums to 164. And John Madden was born during Brownlow Nation 164. This week's winner, Lando Norris, drives the number 4 car, and he won 4 weeks after his last win, which was 16 weeks after his first win, and 16 is 4 squared. It's another Mercury number. In a circle, there's 360 degrees. John Earl Madden sums to 360 with prime numbers. Mercury Morris, the running back, born on the date leaving 360 days in the year. Now, as mentioned earlier, pi is also connected to the number 227. When you write out the number 360, you get ordinal gematria of 227. In the movie Life of Pi, the main character survives for 227 days. Mercury Morris's name, Eugene Morris, equals 227. Eugene Mercury Morris equals 2207. Well, notice how Lando Norris was born 23,227 days after John Madden. And from Madden's death to Lando's win was 2 years and 270 days. I want to talk a little bit more about the planet Mercury. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is Superstream 86. Mercury and the Miami Dolphins both equal 86. Now, if you flip the number 86 upside down, you get a 98. Don Francis Shula sums to 908 with Fibonacci numbers. And race winner Lando Norris was born 9,800 days after Shula's only perfect season. Lando Norris was 9,080 days old for his win on Sunday. And in Singapore, this is like the national holiday. The National Day of Singapore falls on 9/08, the 9th of August. Mercury equals 103 ordinal. And notice how Lando Norris was 103 mercurial years old for the Grand Prix. And of course, Lando, born in 1999. He gets the win 999 days after John Madden died. Lando was also born on the 317th day of the year. Mercury with Fibonacci numbers equals 317. In prime numbers, Mercury equals 349. Well, the name Norris equals 349. Lando was born 34 years and 90 days after the Miami Dolphins were founded. Again, he got his first ever win in Miami earlier this year. Well, measuring from Skull and Bones' big anniversary last year to the date of last weekend, it was 349 days later. So back to the planet Mercury. Notice how John Madden died 86 weeks after Don Shula. or 86 weeks and 1 day. Well, 861 is the 41st triangular number, and both of these connect to Mercury, 86 and 41. The Miami Dolphins equals 86, and Don Shula equals 41. Don Shula was born on the 4th of January, or 4/1. John Madden, born on April 10th, or 4/10. And in ordinal, Madden equals 41. Every planet has its own magic square, and every row and column of Mercury's magic square sums to 260. Well, Don Shula and John Madden were born exactly 26 mercurial years apart. Remember, circle equals 260, and Mercury Morris died 260 days after his birthday. The name Don Francis Shula sums to 325 with capital letters. And this is why we thought there would be a mercurial riddle this weekend. Because for Sunday's race, Donald Trump turned 325 mercurial years old. This race was also 32 months and 25 days after John Madden died. The CEO of McLaren was born exactly 325 weeks after the founding of the Miami Dolphins. I like how Miami Dolphins also has this 85 Gematria. And when Don Shula died, Lando Norris was exactly 85 mercurial years old. So I noticed the Mercury connection to Skull and Bones. And once again, this race was 349 days after Yale's special anniversary. Back in the year 2023, Yale, which is home to the Skull and Crossbones, which equals 223, turned 322 years old. 322, the number on their emblem. So once again, this 223 connects Mercury Morris to the founding of the Miami Dolphins. 223 months old, 223 days after his birthday. But this same measurement right here is also 18 years and 32 weeks exactly. Again, measuring from the birthday of Mercury Morris to the founding of the Miami Dolphins. Well, 1832 is the year that Skull and Bones was founded. And the name Eugene Morris has matching 149 Gematria with Skull and Bones. Measuring from the Super Bowl VII, the NFL's only perfect season, to the birth of Lando Norris is a span of exactly 322 months. Mercury Morris was 921 months old for Yale's big anniversary, which stands out because he died less than a year later, on the date 9/21. All right, a little bit more in order to bring this all together. Before I start to wrap this video up here, we're about an hour or so into the super stream. Thanks to everybody who made it this far, as always. Just the numeric connections between all these guys. I just want to skate over some of these because they're so strong. John Madden's full name equals 124. And when Don Shula died, it was during Brown Lunation 1204. He was the head coach of Miami, which equals 99. The 99th prime number is 523. And Don Shula was 502 months and 3 days old. when the CEO of McLaren, Zak Brown, was born. I point this out because the name Zak Brown sums to 1,523 in the same cipher. 1523 is the 241st prime number, matching the name Don Francis Shula in reverse. And Shula died on the date leaving 241 days in the year. In ordinal, Don Francis Shula, 164, again matching the lunation number for John Madden. These two legendary coaches were born exactly 6 years and 14 weeks apart. John Earl Madden, 614. 614, like the birthday of Donald Trump. 614, June 14th. Francis became the Pope 601 weeks and 4 days before this race. So, nothing too concrete here, but you just kind of see how these numbers have a way of tying these characters together. In reduction, Don Francis Shula equals 65. He was 6,005 days old when when Donald Trump was born. 650 like the Gematria of Mercury Morris in Satanic Gematria. Driver Daniel Ricciardo also had this 650 as well. And the Miami Dolphins, appropriately founded in the year 65. Both Miami, Florida, and Florida with 65 Gematria. When Don Shula died, it was exactly 65 sidereal months, or lunar orbits, before the Pi Day eclipse. The 65th prime number is 313, which is really close to pi, 313. Remember, the Pope was elected on 313, March 13th. A number reflected in Zak Brown's age for this past weekend. The number of days between Morris's and Norris's birthdays. And then there's also more 88, which I've talked about a lot. Don Shula died exactly 880 months after Mercury Morris was born. The planet Mercury takes 88 days to orbit the sun. 87.97 days. Rounded up, you get 88. Las Vegas Raiders also has that 88 Gematria. 2,288 days between the birthdays of Don Francis Shula, 88, and John Madden, 88. The 88 was even there for the Dolphins' age when Madden died. Just glancing down here, looking to see if there's anything else I want to mention before I close this stream down. I guess I do want to mention this. Daniel Ricciardo and the Pi connection. So the number 108 is very important to the mathematics of the circle, which equals 108. Remember, the moon and sun are both 108 times their own diameter from the Earth. The sun is also approximately 108 times the diameter of the Earth. Eugene Mercury Morris sums to 108 in both reduction and reverse reduction. This matches the F1 driver who may have run his last race, Daniel Joseph Ricciardo, equals 108. Ricciardo was 108 months old when the film Pi came out. He was also 9 years and 9 days old for the movie, Mathematics of the circle has matching 99 gematria with circle. The race in Singapore was 9 months and 9 days before the birthday of Daniel, which equals 99. And yeah, I'm just glancing at the chat now. Something about a Chuck Norris Mercury connection. I'm going to have to rewind the chat here in a minute. I will get there. Okay, screw it. Let's do it now. Let's go up through the chat. Okay, so I mentioned how Don Shula and John Madden were born exactly 26 mercurial years apart. And what Bobby threw in the chat is that Chuck Norris and Donald Trump were also born exactly 26 mercurial years apart. So let's scope this out here. March 10th of 1940. So there you go. That is exactly 26 mercurial orbits. Okay. So on the date Mercury Morris died, Chuck Norris would have been just about exactly 351 mercurial years old and was for the race. And, oh, I see the connection. 351 is the 26th triangular number. Very interesting. And yeah, Donald Trump was 325 mercurial years old on that same date. And 325 is another triangular number, 26th and 25th. So a lot of triangles there. That's pretty cool. So I think that's the bulk of what you guys were trying to tell me. I definitely dig it. Chuck Norris sharing a last name with Lando Norris. And look at this. Get the hell out of here. Chuck and Lando have the exact same gematria in all 4 base methods? No way. So this begs the question. How old was Chuck Norris when Lando Norris was born? Oh my gosh, look at this. Lando Norris was exactly 3,114 weeks younger than... Wait, I don't know if I said that right. Chuck Norris was born 3,114 weeks exactly before Lando Norris. That blows my mind. Nashville, Tennessee equals 3,114. The same exact 4 digits. And that's where we got the pie riddle on the same day that Lando won the race? Holy shit. That's wild. So shout out to Dr. Savage, Zenith of the Alpha, Casey Jones for throwing that knowledge at me. That is pretty cool. All right, well, anyway, I did want to talk about this last riddle here because it's very interesting, and then I guess we can wrap things up from there. But this whole connection between Daniel Ricciardo and Don Shula and Don Shula's perfect season. So it's been his whole career in Formula One has been synced to this same riddle. Ricciardo's final race was exactly 691 sidereal months after Super Bowl VII and the NFL's only perfect season. 691, the gematria of masonry, or eclipse of the sun. But more important is this is the 125th prime number. When Don Shula died, it was the 125th day of the leap year. Well, in ordinal, Daniel Ricciardo equals 125. Ricciardo was born on a date with numerology of 116 and 35. The word perfect equals 116 and 35. And when Daniel Ricciardo first raced in F1, he was 8,044 days old, connecting to perfection. Perfection 844 trigonal. Also, revelation is 844 in Hebrew. And revelation 666, the circle, the mathematics, it all part of the same code. So the second perfect number is 28. And notice how Nashville, Tennessee has this 208 as well. Ricciardo's last race was 280 days after Pope Francis's birthday. The name Daniel Ricciardo equals 280. Ricciardo's first race in F1 was exactly 2,008 weeks after Super Bowl VII. So why am I talking about the number 28 and 2008? Well, with all this talk about Darren Aronofsky and his film Pi, I mentioned how this was also synced to the movie The Wrestler, which came out in the year 2008. And notice how the release date was December 17th, which is the birthday of Pope Francis, December 17th. When you measure from the birth of Ricciardo or the 9/11 attacks to the release of this film, you get Mercury numbers, 1917 and 798. But in the year 1998, we didn't just get the film Pi. We also got a movie called Mercury Rising, starring Bruce Willis. Came out 3 months before Pi was released. Daniel's last race was 1,381 weeks after Mercury Rising came out. Well, his full name, Daniel Joseph Ricciardo, equals 1381. This is the 221st prime number. 221 is the number that Darren Aronofsky shares with Circle. The name Lando, also 221. Daniel Ricciardo first raced in F1 when he was a span of 22 years and 10 days old. Pope Francis was elected exactly 221 weeks after the release of The Wrestler on his birthday. Flip these digits around and you get 122. Well, both Pope Francis and Don Shula sum to 122. And Don Shula died 1 month and 22 days after the date of Francis's papacy. All right, one more thing I want to leave you with is this connection here. The name Darren Aronofsky sums to 184 and 85. Now, this 184 is important to Don Shula. On the date of the 9/11 attacks, Don Shula was a span of 26,184 days old. Well, when that same man passed away in 2020, he was exactly 1,084 months old. Notice how the Pi Day eclipse next year falls 184 days after September 11th. measuring from the 9/11 attacks to the eclipse is 8,585 days. Well, Darren Aronofsky equals 85, while the Miami Dolphins equals 85 in reduction. So, viewers, YouTubers, decoders, we have looked at a lot of numerology. And what's so incredible is that I have notes where I could go for another hour, but at this point of the stream, you know, we've been going on for about an hour and 15 minutes. My neck is starting to get pretty sore leaning over into this microphone here. And I'm thinking about calling it a day and giving my throat a little bit of a rest. Yeah, I saw this whole thing with Brett Favre and Parkinson's earlier this morning, too. I think there's definitely something to that, of course. So I will be doing a little more digging. But yeah, shout out to everybody in the chat who was pitching in. There's probably more to be seen that I didn't get to, but again, I think we've ran pretty late today. So with that, please do feel free to like, share, subscribe, and do all that good YouTube stuff. If you guys check the links in the description, you'll find some more links to relevant videos, as well as links to help support the work, which is very much encouraged if you enjoy what I do here. As a supporter of my videos on gematrianator.com, you'll also get features that'll help boost your decoding power. All right, everyone. Peace, love, God bless. We'll talk to y'all next time. See ya.